Welcome to Sawdust and Cornbread. In today's video, I'm going to explain 3 different methods for finishing floors that I used on my own concrete slab basement floor. The first method is a gorgeous faux stone finish using floor paint and floor stain. The second is a realistic tile look using concrete stain. And the third is a tough epoxy coat finish. Now, my basement floor was pretty solid, but it was also very stained from 70 years of use. There were grease marks, paint stains, rust stains, everything you can think of. So the first thing I did was give it a good cleaning, and that's actually what takes up the biggest portion of your time in any of these projects. The prep is exactly the same, so I'm going to go over that first. When you're prepping the floor, it makes sense to sweep and vacuum first just to get any of the large particles off the floor, any debris that might be there, and you're going to follow that up with a good mopping. I personally used hot water with just a little bit of liquid dish soap dissolved in there. I mopped the entire floor, then rinsed it really well and let it dry for 24 hours. Another issue you inevitably have to deal with on any basement floor is paint spatters. So I went ahead, now that the floor was clean, I was able to see what paint was left on the floor. I got a metal scraper spatula and just went to work popping that up, scraping that off the floor, spot by spot, area by area. I kind of did 3 by 3 foot squares to make sure that I got everything off. Now that the floor was clean and dry, I was able to see what paint was actually adhered to the floor that I needed to remove before I put any finish on there. Now, I had a pretty good portion of the floor that was covered in thick beige floor paint, and underneath that was some aqua floor stain that had sparkles in it. So I got some citrus strip, and it worked really well to remove all of that, the main layer of beige paint. There was a little bit of the floor stain left, but it did not affect the end result. I removed a big patch of both layers of the beige and the turquoise glittery paint. Next, I checked the floor for any divots or holes or imperfections that I wanted to smooth out so that they wouldn't show through on the finished floor. I used a Rust-Oleum patch kit for concrete floors. Alright, I think I have finally got these holes cleaned out enough to patch them with this Rust-Oleum patch kit. And it comes with a part A activator and a part B base, and we're supposed to mix it 1 part of the activator to 2 parts of the base. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. All of these were holes and scuffs that I patched, and I sanded them to take off the shine. With all of the holes, divots, and low spots leveled out with that patch kit, I allowed it to cure for about 24 hours and then sanded and scuffed the top of that so that it wasn't shiny, just to help everything adhere better on top of that. I applied concrete acid etch to the floor. This helps remove any remaining oils from the floor and opens up the concrete on a microscopic level to accept whatever finish you put on top. I spread the acid with a rag mop, let it sit for the specified time on the label, scrubbed it into the floor with a stiff floor broom, then washed, rinsed, and wet vacuumed the floor with my shop vac. The floors need to dry for at least 24 hours, allowing the moisture to exit before you put anything on top. I've put up some floor stand fans to facilitate the drying process. And now it's the fun part. For my stone look floor, I used what was in front of me. As I mentioned before, that floor was pretty stained up from prior use, 70 years of wear and tear. So rather than trying to mask these darker stained areas, I used them to my advantage. Using diluted black floor paint, I was able to outline the border of stained areas, creating various shades of stone. Making the stone more realistic entailed using a very thin paintbrush and slowly dragging branches out from that border, creating the effect of breaks and fissures in the stone. I continued this method by adding even smaller twigs and veining from those main veins. To keep the outlined areas from looking too perfect and make them look more natural, I lightly splattered black and white paint to add highlights and lowlights. I took a broad, dry paintbrush and worked these spots into the floor. The finished effect tricks your eye into seeing texture areas on the faux stones. This was a really stained up floor, so I just ran we cleaned it and etched it with an acid etch and cleaned it some more. And then I just ran with floor paint this time, some veins along the natural veining. I continued this method over the entire floor, and then I stood back and just kind of looked at the overall, what it looked like, and any areas I thought looked too perfect, because in nature nothing's really perfect and square. I rounded it off, softened it out, and made it look more natural. Once I was satisfied with the overall finished effect, I sealed everything with a couple of coats of this polyurethane clear gloss coat, and I did thin coats, several of those rather than one thick coat, in order to offer plenty of protection. For my laundry room area, I wanted to create the effect of large tiles on the floor. So I did all the preparation that I outlined before, and then I applied masking tape to the floor in a large grid pattern. Now you can adjust that grid to make any size tile. I prefer the large tile. You could do smaller tiles, you could change the way the tiles are laid out, but for my purposes I laid out a large tile grid pattern. Now keep in mind that wherever you put the masking tape, that's going to become the grout line for your finished tiles. Now I chose to keep the natural color of the floor for my grout, and the way that it's kind of naturally stained and discolored actually added a more realistic grout effect to the floor. If you want your faux tiles to have a different color grout, then you're going to need to stain the floor in the color you want your grout, the entire floor, before you put down the masking tape grid. I chose a mottled brown color for my laundry room faux tiles. I used this natural sea sponge with a patting motion. I just kind of dabbed on the color. I started with a darker color, really focusing on the outer edges. It's important to use a heavier hand close to all the tape borders, because this helps create a crisp edge once the tape is removed. Once the floor dried, I used a slightly lighter shade of brown floor stain and repeated the process using my natural sea sponge. This time I concentrated on the center of each tile, sponging on the stain lightly to achieve my desired mottled appearance. After covering the entire taped off surface with a lighter color, I went back, adding just a little bit of diluted black and white floor paint to add a touch of contrast to each tile. With everything painted and dry, again, I stood back. It's always important to take a step back, look at the overall project, and just see if there's anything that needs to be touched up. Something that looks a little off. You can always go back with more diluted paint or floor stain and go in there and just use your sponge to even it out and make it look right. When everything was the way I wanted it and completely dry, I could peel those pieces of masking tape back and revealed the beautiful formed tiles. At that time, once you're sure everything's good and dry and you've already pulled up the tape, check the borders of each tile and make sure there's not any kind of messed up edges. You want the tiles to be nice and straight and even and sharp at the edges. That's what helps fool your eye into seeing real tile applied to the floor. Then once everything is the way you like it and it's completely dry, you take your clear coat of polyurethane floor finisher, go over the entire floor, tiles, grout, and all. I did several, probably 6 or 7 layers, thin layers of the polyurethane top coat in the clear shiny gloss, and I used a painter's pad to apply that to make a nice even coat, and it has worked out wonderfully. The final floor finish was in the area originally set apart as my cosmetic formulating lab. I chose an epoxy garage floor finish because it's tough and durable. I needed something to withstand chemical cleansers, dragging heavy objects across the floor, and this is a very tough and resilient finish for any concrete floor. Before mixing the epoxy finish with its activator, I poured all the colored epoxy into one bucket and mixed them together thoroughly. This assured a consistent color even though I had to use 2 separate kits to have enough to cover the floor. Next, I mixed in the activator. This is what the Part A activator looks like. It's clear, kind of oily looking. Pouring that into the Part B base. Applying the epoxy coat is just like painting a wall. I filled a paint tray with the epoxy and rolled it directly on the floor with a paint roller attached to a long wooden handle. I ended up using 2 coats to give my floor maximum coverage. Alright, it is 24 hours later and looking good. I am so pleased with all 3 of these finishing methods for our concrete slab basement floor. They really stood the test of time. I can mop them, sweep them, vacuum them as needed, and they are in tip-top condition. They have endured spills, pet accidents, all kinds of mishaps, and they look great. The only place that shows a little bit of damage is on that epoxy coat floor where I drug an extremely heavy desk across it and didn't realize that one of the legs had a sharp piece of metal, so it kind of gouged it, but it's really tough and resilient. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Click the link below for the Sawdust and Cornbread blog. I post on there 3 or 4 times a week. There's lots of good home improvement ideas that won't break the bank. You can also look in the comment area below to see if you caught all the Disney Easter eggs in this week's blog. Thanks for joining me. Were you able to spot all of the hidden Mickeys and Disney Easter eggs in today's video? Here's a quick recap of where they were all hidden. Also, be sure to check in the notes area below the video to see all the Easter eggs in this week's Sawdust and Cornbread blog. Thanks for joining us.